There's lots of ideas in the magazine for different colourways for flowers and things, but if you need to decide which ink pads to use your layering stamps with what you've got at home, it's a good idea to do some test swatches to see what will work. So I've got 3 ink pads here that are the same sort of colour range, but I'm not sure, particularly between these last two, which ones will be the darkest. So if you create test swatches and then name them or number them so that you know which ink pads each have come from, you can use these time and time again. And I would actually store these probably with my magazine or with my stamps so that I know each time. So just doing a little swipe of the ink pads here and seeing, oh yes, so that one's actually really quite dark compared to this one. So that's a really nice gradient between the 3 shades of this same colour. So I'm going to keep them on my desk in that order and keep this set behind it so that I know they're the colours and they're the ones I'm going to use with my stamps. So for stamping, what I'm going to do this time for my flower is I'm not going to be using the outline as I have done before. I'm going to go straight in with the more solid flower here and pop this onto an acrylic block. And I'm going to start with the lightest colour. Now what I've found with the distress inks is very often the colour will pool when you're stamping, particularly large areas, but I really like this effect when we're stamping flowers because with the petals it gives more of a mottled look, which is not completely smooth, but it's a really pretty effect. So this is very, very pale flower here, so you can just about see that outline there. So then moving on to the next stage, I'm going to take from the set, so we've got the outline, we've got the solid flower, we've got a little less of the colour there, even less on this one, and then the tiny little shading areas on this one. So there's actually, if you use the outline, there's actually 5 stages to the main petals of the flower. So I'm going to jump straight to this second layer of colour, and here I'm going to use the next darkest one, so this will be quite a bit darker, but again it is a distress ink, so you are going to get that variation of colour where it pools and it's not completely smooth and covered equally. And layer this over. Now just bear in mind that you've got some missed areas on this, so you'll need to work out whereabouts this goes because you'll have some parts that you can't quite see to the flower at the moment. So we've got the lighter areas up here, we've now got a darker shadow down here, and then moving on to the next stage. All of these layers are explained in the magazine as well, so you're never left on your own with them. So I'm just bringing in that really dark colour. Now this isn't a distress ink, so this will cover a little more smoothly, a little more uniformly, if that's a word. And just take your time to judge whereabouts you need to place that. So that's adding some darker shading in there. That's absolutely beautiful. And of course, when you cut this out using the die that's been provided to cut that shape out, which is this one, you're going to be able to clearly see the shape of the flower even more so. So I do have the center to do also. So I'm going to take the center detail and I'm going to stamp this with a grey. So it's just adding a subtle hint of colour there, nothing too bright. I'm going to pop that in the middle like so, just so we can see some shading there. And of course grey will go with absolutely anything. So lastly, what I want to do with this flower is when that's completely dry, I'm going to add some white outlines to it. Okay, so you can just see those, and that's using the outline stamp. So I'll let that dry and then we'll come back and we'll stamp and heat emboss that. So I've left that for a little while to dry. If you need to check whether it's dry or not before you do your heat embossing, it's a good idea to take some embossing powder, just sprinkle it over the image and tip it off. Okay, so if we tip this onto a scrap of paper there, so I can see there that I've got a slightly damp patch where the powder's stuck here. So what you can do now is just leave that to dry. It's they're water-based inks if you're using things like distress inks, so that won't take long at all. But as soon as that has dried, this powder will just brush off, or you can tap it away and you'll know that that's all dried. So I'll give that another few more minutes before I get to doing my heat embossing. So now that I'm sure that this ink is completely dry, I can do my outline stamping, and I'm going to use an embossing ink and use the outline stamp that comes with this floral set. So this is really pretty as well, just to use on its own, whether you use it with embossing powder or just with an ink. And if you are embossing it, you could go in and colour it in with watercolours or something like that if you wanted to, or alcohol pens, rather than with your layering stamps, just as another option for you. So just layering this outline over the top there, pressing it down, and then I'll put my white powder over the top. Tap this off, and then I will heat set this, and then I'll die cut it out. So now I have 3 flowers stamped and heat embossed the outline and then die cut them out using the die that's actually included with the set. So that's the outline die. Now with this centre one, what I did is I used the darker colour for the second layer of ink, and then used a second layer of this for the third layer. So that's just given me a little bit of variation between the 3 flowers. So although they're the same colours, get slightly different shade with one of them, so it looks a little more realistic and a bit more dimensional. So my card base that I'm going to put these onto, this is made up with a backing paper. This has actually come from the inside of the magazine. It's really, really beautiful. So you can see you've got the 2 options, different sides you can use. Usually if I'm using large flowers like these, I will use a smaller print for the background so that they don't get lost in amongst these larger flowers on this side. But because they're double-sided, you've got the option of using either or. And I love that the colourways in here, so I've chosen the teals, and of course they match. So you've got pinks, purples, greens, teals and blues. You've got all sorts of colourways within these papers. And the magazine projects are using the papers as well, so you've got loads of inspiration in there. So I've already cut this down to size, and then I've used some square nesting dies just to cut out a white frame, and this just helps to section the card a little bit and give you a base to then place around your flowers. So I'm going to put one of my florals there, I think, probably another one tucking these ones under the frame, and then this one over the top, and that just gives the impression that these flowers are growing around this frame. And you can play with the composition for a while, and then I'm just going to stick those down. So I'm going to use foam tape on this white frame, foam tape underneath this patterned paper, and then with these I'm going to use foam as well, but I'm actually going to be just shaping these a little bit, just squeezing and rolling the corners of the petals a little so that they are shaped enough just to lift up and give a little bit of dimension when they're on the card. So these would be beautiful for going into a box maybe rather than an envelope. But I'll glue those down and then we'll come back and finish with the sentiment. So as you can see there, I've just curled and rolled my flowers, and everything, all the layers have foam tape underneath them. The last layer I have to put on here is my Thinking of You sentiment, and of course it's matching those colours as well. This has come from the magazine. There's sentiments in there that are printed already, ready to cut out. They're absolutely beautiful. Again, all the colourways match. Now I could put this, I think I'm going to overlap that frame there, because I'm overlapping the frame a little bit. I've got foam tape already on the back, but that's going to not be flat if I put that down over that frame that's got foam tape on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise up an area underneath for the frame to sit on, or sorry, for the sentiment to sit on. So if I put a piece of foam there, take the backing off, I can then put my sentiment over the top onto that foam, and that will lift it up all to the same level. So there, then that's sitting completely flush across there. So there's my card, and of course we do have included in the stamp set the leaves as well, and we have the die that will cut out the leaf shape for you if you want to. So you could add some leaves in there also if you wanted to, but I think that's really, really beautiful, and it just comes together so quickly using everything that comes with your magazine kit.